Regular inspection and reconditioning of the mower drive system should be carried on after each period of extended use. To prepare the mower for reconditioning, the axle should be blocked so that the wheels are off the floor. The mower can then be placed in typical working position by supporting the front of the tongue to a height of about 31 inches. To check the pawls and spring assembly, the wheel must be removed. Take off the cotter key and remove the linch collar. Then remove the wheel. Remove the pawls and springs for cleaning. Clean the pawl seats and axle thoroughly with kerosene and brush. Old grease containing particles of dust and grit will act as an abrasive to increase wear on moving parts. In the same manner, clean the ratchets in the wheel. Use a cloth to dry the ratchets. Also, wipe off the axle and the pawl seats, removing excess kerosene and all remaining dirt and grit. Clean the pawls and springs. Remove all grease and dirt so that these parts can be inspected for wear. On comparing an old pawl with a new one, wear is immediately apparent. The old pawl on the left is badly grooved and must be replaced. To check the play in the flywheel shaft bearings, the flywheel is moved up and down. This much play indicates worn bearings that cause the shaft to knock. The flywheel shaft must be removed. On this type mower, the shaft is taken out from the front of the housing. Therefore, remove the connecting rod nut and take off the connecting rod. The pitman is connected to the flywheel by the wrist pin. Remove the pitman nut from the wrist pin. And take off the pitman. To start removal of the flywheel shaft, raise the gear nest cover, insert a punch between the ring gear and pinion to lock the gears. Then, using an iron bar, start the flywheel turning to the left or counterclockwise. The punch locks the gears firmly, allowing the shaft to be unscrewed from the pinion. The shaft is now free and can be removed. To replace a worn wrist pin, clamp the flywheel firmly in a vise. It is well to saw the wrist pin part way through to make it easier to break off. Make the cut as close as possible to the flywheel. strike the wrist pin with a hammer to break it off. With the hammer and punch, drive out the shank of the wrist pin. Insert the new wrist pin. Use a hardwood block to protect the threads while hammering it into place. To rivet the new wrist pin securely in place, put the flywheel on the special anvil and swell the back of the wrist pin with the pin of a hammer. Finish flattening the back of the pin with the face of the hammer. The shaft is ready for later replacement. Before taking out the gear assembly, the main drive gear shield must be removed. This shield protects the main drive gear from dirt and foreign matter. Remove both the bolts from the rear of the shield. Then take out the third bolt, which is at the front of the shield. The shield can now be removed. Disassemble the gears. First, remove the flywheel shaft pinion. Straighten the cotter key and the adjusting nut. Remove the cotter key. Unscrew the adjusting nut which governs the mesh of the ring gear and pinion. Be careful to catch the ball bearings as they fall. Remove the cotter key on the right-hand side of the counter shaft. To reach the cotter key at the left side of the counter shaft, the spur gear must be forced out of the way. Remove this cotter key. Using a punch, drive out the counter shaft pin and remove it from the gear nest. With the counter shaft removed, the various parts of the gear assembly can be taken out for cleaning and inspection. Use a brush and kerosene to remove all old grease and dirt from gear parts. Remember that accumulated grit greatly increases wear on moving metal parts. Dry the parts of the gear assembly with a clean cloth so that they can be inspected for wear. The teeth on this main spur gear pinion are worn to a sharp edge. This part must be discarded. Likewise, the old flywheel shaft pinion is badly worn and must be replaced with a new one. To remove the worn lower bearing, Place a bar through the flywheel shaft housing. Set the bar firmly against the bearing before each blow of the hammer. Drive the bearing out. To drive out the worn upper bearing, extend the bar from the lower end of the shaft housing. Before installing the new bearings, check them on the flywheel shaft for clearance. Be sure the lower bearing fits snugly but moves freely without binding. The upper bearing also should be checked for clearance. These bearings must allow the shaft to revolve easily without knocking or freezing. First, install the new lower bearing. Align the oil holes in the bearing with those in the shaft housing. Hammer the new bearing into place. Use a hardwood block to prevent burring or otherwise damaging the bearing. Be sure the bearing is driven in completely. The new upper bearing is installed in the same manner. Insert the bearing with the oil cup on top. Using a hardwood block, hammer the bearing until the oil cup fits solidly into its groove in the shaft housing. Check to see that the oil holes in the lower bearing are aligned with those in the shaft housing. The flywheel shaft is now carefully replaced in the housing. Screw the new pinion onto the shaft. When the mower is in operation, the pinion is continually tightened by the turning of the shaft. To replace the gear assembly, push the counter shaft through the first bearing and install the washer. Then place the new main spur gear pinion in position. Fit the clutch onto the large ring gear and slip the clutch spring onto the ring gear hub. Place these parts in the gearbox and work the counter shaft through the ring gear. Install the second washer. Then slide the counter shaft completely into position. Next, align the hole in the ring gear hub with the counter shaft pin hole. Replace the counter shaft pin. Replace the cotter key at the right-hand side of the counter shaft. And the key at the left side. Spread the keys. The adjusting nut should be packed in cut grease, both to lubricate the ball bearings and to hold them in place as the adjusting nut goes on the counter shaft. Tighten the adjusting nut enough to bring the cogs of the ring gear and the flywheel shaft pinion into full mesh without binding. Insert the cotter key in the adjusting nut and spread it. This completes the gear assembly reconditioning job. Before replacing the wheel assembly, the parts must be lubricated. Use a good grade of light grease on the ratchets of the wheel. Likewise, apply grease thoroughly to the axle and particularly to the pawl and spring seats. The new pawls and springs are now replaced. Insert the spring first, then the pawl. The grease will hold the parts in position until the wheel can be replaced. Slide the wheel onto the axle. Put on the linch collar. Insert the cotter key and spread it to complete the wheel assembly. Both wheels are reconditioned in the same manner. Finally, replace the pitman and the connecting rod. Make sure the nuts are tightened securely. It is best to lubricate the mower immediately after reconditioning. Use a good grade of machine oil for all cups in the drive shaft, the axle, and the counter shaft. Be sure to apply plenty of lubricant to the gears. During actual operation, the drive system of the mower should be lubricated with machine oil 4 times daily. Remember the 3 main operations in reconditioning the mower drive system. First, the wheel assembly. Remove the wheel. Clean the parts. Lubricate the assembly and replace worn pawls and springs. Second, the drive shaft. Replace any worn part on the shaft itself. Remove worn drive shaft bearings. Install new bearings. Third, the gear assembly. Remove, clean, and inspect gear parts. Reassemble the gears, replacing any worn part. Regular attention to these details will make your mower an efficient, clean-cutting, smooth-running machine for many more years.